we should go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Clark. I'm one of the co-chairs of the PID interest group. There are two other co-chairs on the call today. There's Josh Brown. Josh, do you want to say hi and wave?
Hi, everybody.
There's Josh. And coming to us from Japan is Nabuko.
Hello.
Hi, welcome. Thank you. The three of us will, well, I'm going to run the slide deck and try and field the questions, but Josh and Nabuko will be checking the chat and also the meeting notes. So please, the goal of this session really is anything and all topics around persistent identifiers. Please feel free to ask. We'll endeavor to answer them. If we can't, we'll note them and get back to you. The title, PID Slam. Well, I don't know if any of you have been to a poetry slam, but they're often loud and lively. Lots of audience participation, hint, hint, audience participation. Cheering sometimes, dramatic delivery. So the idea really was to create a little bit of something different. Often with our sessions, we have a theme. This time we dropped the theme and we've got a little bit of everything to try and update everyone around what's going around the world of persistent identifiers. Here's our agenda. So it's me at the top, introduction. If you're new, I'll introduce the interest group just shortly. We're going to hear from Todd Carpenter about the work they've been doing developing a national PID strategy for the US. Wouter Adding has joined us to talk about DISCO and particular their phase they're in. Josh is going to do a quick pitch for PIDFest. The reason that Helena and Matt is scrubbed through, they're going to be with us in our second session. They couldn't make this session. Larry Bannum from CNRI is going to talk about PIDs at scale. And we've got a couple of updates. We used to do this more often. There are other working groups, of course, and interest groups within RDA that are relevant to persistent identifiers. And we often have these shared sessions. And I'm really happy we've got Rory and Natasha today with us to just update us on, if you don't happen to be at their interest group or are unable to attend, here's a little short note of what they're doing. And we've got plenty of time at the end, hopefully, for questions, comments, and discussions. But we'll take questions anytime at all during the whole session. We're here for the next hour and a half. And as I said, there's another session. If you think you have colleagues that would benefit from this, and then there's another session coming up next week, which they're welcome to attend. Go on. Collaborative notes. For those of you familiar with RDA and the plenaries, all sessions have collaborative notes. The clue's in the name, they're notes and they're collaborative, which means we all get to write down our thoughts and notes, and that way create a kind of a written record of the session. There's a link in the chat, several links in the chat, hopefully, or you could scan this QR as well. If you could go there now, please, and sign in with your name and your affiliation and email address, that would be very helpful. Feel free to write your thoughts as they come, or ask any questions there too, and the same with the chat. So if you are new to RDA or are new to the persistent identifier interest group, what is this? It's actually been a long-standing group. It's been around for a long time. Of course, it's all about persistent identifiers. And we sort of believe in this interest group that PIDs are foundational. Knowing what's what and where to find it kind of underpins almost everything in the data world and in research today. And it's easy to think of it as plumbing, right? It's just there, it works, right? You click on it, it works. But there's an awful lot, as some of you know, an awful lot more to it than that. And so we think that it's still worth, even though it's really accepted practice across RDA to implement identifiers, we still think it's worthwhile having an interest group that brings the different facets together. And so what is it? What do we do? Well, we're a place to share efforts, to exchange information, ask any questions, and also address any important and emerging topics. And what we've done in the last few plenaries was to focus down on one particular topic. What we've done here, as you saw from that agenda, is really try and be broad and open and really take all comers. So I'm going to shut up and hand over to Todd. I'm running the slide deck, so Todd, if I don't manage to figure out what slide's next, then just prompt me and I'll do it.
I can
So
prompt you.
over to Todd. I'm really happy to introduce Todd Carpenter, you Executive Director of NISO, and there you go. Todd, take it away.
All right, slide. So, and a last minute note, if you've been paying attention to the agenda, Jonathan had put us down to talk about everything going on in the world of PIDs. We thought to narrow that down just slightly. If you have any questions, I'm happy to talk about anything PIDs. I'm also this year was elected to serve as chair of the ISO identifiers group, that's TC46SC9. There's a variety of interesting things happening in the wider world of PIDs, but I'm not going to talk about that in detail. I'm happy to, if there's time, fill in some gaps, but Jonathan, my estimation, so I don't go to puppetry slams, I don't go to poetry slams. My wife is involved in puppetry, so I go to puppetry slams. And I should have made the connection and had maybe some puppets things as part of this slide deck. It's not nearly as interesting as it maybe could be. John, maybe for next week. I'm going to talk to you about some work, joint project between RDA US, the Open Research Funders Group, and a few other organizations that have put together a report. I'm going to very briefly run through the report on developing a national PID strategy. John and I were co-chairs of that group, and we've been working more or less for the past year or so, year and a half maybe. So next slide. In June of 2022, there is a group of funding bodies, the Open Research Funders Group, and they partnered with Helios Open, that's the Higher Education Leadership Initiative for Open Scholarship. They launched a public effort to improve tracking of research output. And one element of that was developing a work stream to develop a national strategy related to PIDs and metadata. We'll share the slides so you can click through to links if you want more information about any of these. Building on the framework of the National PID Strategies Interest Group here at RDA, we launched a group. Oh, I disappeared. I hate it when Zoom does this. Hopefully I'll come back. Oh, well, I'm still here. We launched a group in June of 23. We worked basically for 9-10 months to develop this national strategy. Next slide. And this is part of a multi-stage effort. The working group that we just did worked to develop this draft. We're in the process of socializing it, circulating it amongst the stakeholders in the United States. And then we'll move it forward in the next stage to formalize it through a NISO standards process. Ideally, and again, this is contingent on approval from the NISO members, we'll launch that project later this year. So the first element of the report covers the research ecosystem, both internationally and within the US context. We are aware of all of the work being done by RDA, the various national bodies that have developed national PID strategies, as well as international efforts related to open science by UNESCO and other organizations, as well as work by the PID infrastructure groups to connect the dots, so to speak, or the plumbing that Jonathan was talking about. We also talk about the research ecosystem in the United States, which is somewhat different from many other national contexts. There's a lack of central organization and structure in the United States in a way that exists in other national contexts. Different research entities involved in our space, et cetera, as well as the US policy ecosystem. And those things have tied together in order to put forward, this is sort of the right time to put together a strategy. Now, the draft strategy as we've put it together does diverge from some other national strategies. And rather than as the PID interest groups have put forward, that set out specific identifiers for their use and applications, because our ecosystem is more dispersed and more heterogeneous, we wanted to focus this on kind of a broader, more theoretical approach. And recognizing that we are a small, relatively small group, we weren't really reticent, and other parties in the US ecosystem as well are reticent to pick winners and losers. So we wanted to de-emphasize that list of specific identifiers or brands that other strategies have put forward. We think this gives opportunities to allow existing identifier infrastructures to improve, to move towards principles of open science, as well as greater interoperability, but it also leaves open gaps for extending and evaluating those infrastructures. So the proposed components focus on stakeholders, and a large part of this is focused on the desirable characteristics of the PIDs, not so much this one, this one, or that one, but outlining what it means to be open, persistent, resolvable, interoperable, and how those things tie to effective use of science and open science. Other areas of recommendations include strategies and investments and how do you measure success. We also touch on, obviously, the benefits of embracing PIDs. This probably won't make it into the final standard, but it does highlight the value. And again, much of this echoes the work done by the More Brains Cooperative, a number of the other national PID strategies groups that have taken place. And this is the most important element of the draft that we produced, is focusing on these desirable characteristics: stability and permanence, uniqueness, resolvability, open availability of metadata and the identifier strings, the ties to community governance, public and open documentation, monitoring, reportment, as well as the ease of assignment metadata curation in our space. So these things coalesce around the open scientific infrastructure that we're trying to create. And if you think about the number of persistent identifiers in our space, many of them align with most of these desirable characteristics. How do we move some of them in the direction of better interoperability based on these? So we also provide some recommendations for existing PID infrastructure about unifying approach and compliance with policies. This is particularly important here in the United States with reliance on public open access policies. And how do we evaluate PID structures, and how do we move towards adoption of standardized PIDs? Again, we recognize that there are a variety of infrastructure elements here, legacy systems, we have PID management issues, investments around emerging needs, as well as how do we measure success. And then we outline various areas in our community in the US context where new areas of investment should be made, particularly around the technology and community education, outreach, and of course, interoperability. And then finally, just a handful of success metrics that we can use to assess the performance of this strategy and how to move that process forward. As I mentioned, this is we're in the kind of discussion phase, trying to reach out to the community, gather input and ideas. there's a discussion board in the PID forum community. I'm going to drop into the chat a series of links. So you can join in the conversation if you'd like. We'd welcome that. We also would like to acknowledge the support of RDA US and the Tigris program there, RDA Indiana University, as well as the Open Research Funders Group, Helios, and Spark. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Invisible Todd.
Yeah. Zoom's
Yeah,
doing
strange.
weird things.
Yeah. Do we have any questions, comments? One question I had, I came up with some groups, I think it was Crossref, but I wasn't sure. I think it was a group of people, there's a couple of academics too, came up with the principles of open scholarly POSI. And I wondered if you'd looked at those too. That tackles some of the issues that you've gone about what makes a sustainable infrastructure. I wondered if you'd taken that as one of the inputs.
That was one of our inputs. We did consider that. We did think about some of the other elements here, some of the other guidance documents that exist in our space. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think there was an audit, I can't remember who it was, someone contacted the DOI Foundation about did the kind of audit of various scholarly systems too. And I thought that was interesting. I personally thought it was a bit flawed, but the concept was good, I think.
Yeah, I think more and more, so this is John, I'm the co-chair that Todd mentioned, more and more organizations and initiatives are trying to look for indicators for trust. And I think, yeah, that POSI principles are those, a good example of that. We do reference that in the report and talk about that and do bring up some of the kind of ideas that the POSI principles are putting forth. I do also know on the POSI website, which is at principlesofscholarlyinfrastructure.org, you can see those who have adopted and done audits. So I think that's kind of what you were talking about, is there's some scholarly infrastructure and PID providers who have done audits against those principles. But in general, what we're trying to do with this report is kind of have a more nuanced and conceptual discussion about what are desirable characteristics, not just of the features of the technology, but also the governance and the sustainability of PIDs, so that as we move forward with building strategies, we can have something to can we rely on as a rubric. Yep.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's funny. It takes me back when I first joined this interest group. I think we just done a deliverable of what makes a PID system trustworthy, and it was one RDA guidelines on trustworthy PID. So it's great to see it all come forward. Okay, thanks very much. We're going to move on. Thanks. And as I said, if you've got colleagues who've missed it or you've got questions you missed, then they're going to be back in next week to talk about it again. So I'm going to move on to Wouter. Are you there, Wouter?
Yes, I'm here.
Brilliant. Okay. Wouter's works in Leiden. That's the Naturalis, which is the most, if you ever get a chance to visit in the Netherlands, Amsterdam's great, but go to Leiden to the Natural History Museum. It is truly remarkable. I'm going to hand over to Wouter. Disco.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yes, my role in Disco is leading the technical development of the infrastructure. So I would like to tell you a little bit more about Disco and about the phase in which we are currently in the developments, and in particular the role of PIDs in that. Next slides. So Disco is a large initiative by more than 170 institutions, musea, and other facilities hosting natural science collections in Europe to create a new research infrastructure for these scientific collections, to basically transform the current fragmented landscape into one virtual European collection. Next slide. Creating a research infrastructure is a lot of work. We have gone through a preparatory phase to get necessary maturity in different dimensions, like maturity in governance, in data, in finance, etc. And currently we are in a transition phase towards becoming an ERIC. An ERIC is an European Research Infrastructure Consortium. It is a legal body for research infrastructures in Europe. And the benefit of becoming such a research infrastructure is that you have long-term funding by the governments, by the countries. So it's very sustainable. So currently we are in a transition phase. It's a short phase of 18 months. We have some funding from the European Commission for that. And in this phase, we do all the necessary preparations to become that ERIC. So agreeing with the countries to set that up, to establish statutes, financial model, etc. But also we do some technical developments there, because we want to be operational already at the start of establishing the ERIC. So we had the luck that we had some funded projects already, that we could start some technical development of the data infrastructure already, the technical infrastructure. And in the transition phase, we want to move that forward to a technical readiness level 6 core data infrastructure, serving a small subset of our collections in Europe. I think about 2 million specimens, together with 700,000 or 800,000 images. And all these specimens will get a disto container on the internet, and these containers get persistent identifiers. Next slide. So why these identifiers? Basically, we have a decades, or maybe I should say centuries-old problem of referring reliable to these specimens that we have in the collections, for instance, in literature publications. Specimens, objects in the collections have local identifiers. They are usually physically attached to the objects, to a label, a written or printed label, or a QR code. And these labels often contain some semantics, like to which taxonomic group the object belongs, or to which collection. So they are not persistent, they change over time. And it's very difficult to change them all into persistent identifiers, because there are billions of objects in hundreds of institutions. And to physically change all the labels would be a tremendous job that would take decades to achieve, and would also be too costly. And we don't have that time. We need to use the references to these objects right now in research. Also, we want them to be machine actionable, ready for AI. So we have some special needs for these PIDs. Next slide. So the PIDs refer to a disto specimen, which is a disto object which can be seen as a container on the internet that contains all the information that we know about the specimens. So the metadata, where it was collected, by whom it was collected, when it was collected, but also related information like sequence information from samples that were taken from the specimen, chemical composition, trait information, etc. Next slide. So we want to use DOIs as the persistent identifiers for these digital specimens and their digital media objects. And why DOIs? Because they have a mature infrastructure. Larry can say a lot more about that than I can, but it is an infrastructure that is distributed and highly available and very reliable. There is a mature organization behind that. It's the DOI Foundation, and of course, Jonathan can tell a lot more about that. The adoption is mature. They are around for more than 20 years already. They are widely used in science, very well known, and they are in good standing. And DOIs are based on the handle system, and the handle system has some unique features that we want to use to achieve the machine actionability. Next slide. So the DOIs that we want to mint for our digital specimens have some unique characteristics. They are just DOIs, but they are also special in the sense that we want to have a lot of them. So we want to actually create billions of DOIs for all the billions of objects that are there in the world, the specimen objects and their media representations. But we also want to store metadata, what we call fair digital object metadata in the PID records. So the digital specimens are fair digital objects, so they are fair by design, and they have some metadata in the PID records that machines can use to make sure that the object is the right object to retrieve before it actually retrieves the object. And also it can use the metadata to find out what operations are possible on that object. So the metadata is not only machine readable, but the object is also machine actionable because the machine knows what type of object it is and what operations are possible. Another characteristic that we want to make use of is a multiple redirect. Is another thing that's supported by the handle system. So we want to provide redirects, for instance, for the images to a JSON version for machines, or a HTML version for users, or the bit sequence of the image if that is required directly. We also have these objects as immutable objects, so people can annotate them, machines can annotate the objects. That means that they change over time, and that means that they need to be versioned. We want to mint only one DOI for the object, so we do a versioning through appending the version to the DOI. That means that if you do not append a version, that you retrieve the latest version of the object, but if you append a certain version, then you get the object at the state of that version. And we also have full lifecycle support, data lifecycle support for the DOIs. That means that if the objects no longer should exist, for instance, because it was a duplicate being created, then we can create a tombstone version. That means that the identifier still exists, but it then redirects you to another version of the object. Next slide. For people who don't know how DOI system or the handle system works, the unique thing is that it resolves to a PID record, and that PID record redirects you to a landing page. And most people don't notice that because you go directly in your browser to the landing page. But that PID record actually allows us to store that extra metadata that is required for machines, and to be able to specify multiple URLs that the PID record can redirect to. Next slide. We created a few DOIs already that have all these characteristics that we want. We are now working together with a publisher, with Pensoft, to do a demonstration of a publication that uses these DOIs. And it uses also some of the unique characteristics. So one thing that they are planning to do is that in their UNO system, ARFA, they recognize these DOIs as digital specimen DOIs, and they can use the metadata in the PID records to immediately display if a user goes over the DOI in the text, some extra information so that the user knows, okay, this is actually the specimen that I'm interested in. And we also want to make use of nanopubs in the publication that we can use to easily track which specimens are cited in the publication and by whom. For the DOIs, we first aimed to become our own registration agency under the DOI Foundation, but we found the DataCite as an existing RA very willing to help us with our special needs. So we are currently working on a strategic partnership with DataCite to mint these DOIs. Currently, the infrastructure from DataCite is not capable of fitting all our needs in terms of the metadata in the PID records, but also in terms of the amount of DOIs that we need to mint. So we are using some own infrastructure that we developed for that. But we are working together with them to bring that also to the DataCite infrastructure, so that in the future also all our DataCite members can make use of these advanced capabilities. Next slide. We have a lot of documentation available, a lot of resources that's just here in the slides. So if you are interested in that, you can just follow the links in these slides.
Terrific. Thanks, Wouter. That's great. I don't know if there are any. There's a question came in on chat from Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. Can a link be provided? Oh, sorry. Can a link be provided to the slide deck, Pete? And can the link also be placed in the session notes? Yeah, I have most of the slides. One set of slides is on Google. The rest came into me, but we'll find a way to post the slides for sure. So thanks, Wouter. One of the reasons that I was really keen to hear what you have to say is that perhaps we passed on it too quickly, but that initial phase that you've been doing 5 years to build up the know-how, I think that's really remarkable. It's one of the things that always gives us pause for thought is there's a lot of know-how involved in persistent identifier infrastructure, and it's very difficult to document because it sits here or it sits. We're going to hear from Larry shortly. A lot of knowledge in Larry's head on how the handle system works. How do we document this in a way that if we don't exist, that the next generation knows it? I wondered if you had some initial thoughts on that. I mean, you spent 5 years building up your know-how. How are you going to pass it on to your colleagues for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, however many years?
Yeah, one of the things that we have done is that we did a lot of research what the best strategy would be for us, and at the end we had some consultations with experts, but also some open consultations in kind of workshops. So we got a lot of feedback on that, and we created a publication which is used a lot actually. I think it was also one of the bases for some considerations being done by RAID as a new initiative to also use DOIs. So yeah, that's how we did it. So we just created a scientific publication out of that.
Great. Other questions from the group?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Questions being put in the notes from Jonathan.
Yeah, sorry, Leslie, your sound's breaking up a bit, but
Yeah.
the question, there is a question. I think what I think what Leslie was saying was there's a question that's gone in the notes, and the question here is,
Oh, right.
given the sheer volume of PIDs being minted, are you likely to hit issues with end users citing all items in publications, etc., e.g. complex citation issues? Also, why DOIs as opposed to other PID types, e.g. handles? So 2 questions. Maybe the first one is that kind of that issue of volume. How will you manage that?
Yeah, the issue of volume is an issue that I think there's a whole IDA interest group working on that actually. So that is not something that is easy to solve for us. So what we aim to provide is a way that you can have a collection of identifiers if you have a large number, and you give that collection, you make a dataset out of that collection, you refer to that collection, and that gets also a DOI. So that's one way of doing it. Usually people do not refer large numbers of specimens in their publications. It's maybe 30 or 40 specimens max. So it's not in the thousands or more. The second question, why DOIs? So yeah, maybe the question should be why DOIs, not just handles, because it's just a handle infrastructure. And the main reason for that is that we want to have these identifiers persistent, and persistence is very important for us because the objects can exist for hundreds of years. So the identifiers and the digital information also needs to persist for hundreds of years. And the only way to achieve that, you cannot achieve that technically. The only way to achieve that is to do that by having an organization like the DOI Foundation with a number of stakeholders that have an interest in maintaining the PID infrastructure in the long term. So that is why we want to make use of the DOI Foundation, because it's already around for around about 20 years, and it's not having any signs of aging. So apparently that's a successful way of doing this. The organization
The only thing that's aging are the people involved in it, which is why my question on know-how, because that's starting to cross our minds about how we document properly in a way that people can actually, and also how we bring new people on board, so that we can take it through to the next generation. Because largely, it's been the DOI Foundation's grown up with the same people, and so that's actually, I think, and I think that's true for quite a lot of infrastructure that was born in the 80s. Leslie, please.
Just quickly, I've put it in the chat, the Complex Citations Working Group actually is doing a case study on the problem of identifiers for physical samples, because usually, quite often in a paper, someone wants to cite 2,000 samples. So yeah, we're working with the ESIP, Earth Systems Information Partners in the US, with their physical samples cluster to work this through. So again, we'd appreciate expansion of this use case to cover what's being discussed here.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Okay, let's move on. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing okay. So let's move on. Josh. So I forgot to begin. Having said that, I would introduce. This is Josh's first meeting as co-chair of this interest group, and I was going to give him a special welcome, and then I forgot. So there you go, Josh. Special welcome. We've got a few slides to talk about PIDFest. Over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. And yeah, it was a great honour to be invited to be a co-chair of the group. So I just want to say it's great to come together at events like RDA and in these interest groups with like-minded folks and dig into some of the thorny questions around persistence. As well sort of observed on the talking about the DOI Foundation, and John commented in the chat. It's not really a feature of technology, persistence. It's a feature of organizations. It's a feature of initiatives. making sure that you have this kind of long-term persistence is really critical. And bringing the community together to think about this is really what we wanted to do. And we wanted to do this a few years ago. Some of you may remember there was a series over 3 or 4 years of conferences specifically dedicated to persistent identifiers. So we're including, think about PIDapalooza. Now, that came about because there were a group of us who felt that we'd been having conversations on the sideline of things like for Force Conference and RDA and others, but it would be good to come together and actually have a dedicated session just to talk about this. And it grew every year, and it grew every year. And there was a bit of a hiatus after COVID, and some of the co-founders' kind of priorities shifted. They needed to do other things. So what we've done is, with a lot of impetus from, I think Natasha Simons, as a special shout out goes to her, from ARDC, kind of felt that we really needed to re-energize this hey Tash, re-energize this conversation. And it kind of came about as well through a lot of the work here. It ties into the national PID strategies, having a space to come together as groups and meet with PID providers, meet others. So what you're seeing here is this kind of announcement of the PID Fest. You can find more information at pidfest.org. It's the 11th to 13th of June in Prague, in Czechia, and you can see the list of funders and supporters at the bottom. It's got funding from the European Union, the Czech Ministry of Education. We've got the National Technical Library, the National Research Infrastructures for Australia, or NCRIS, and of course ARDC, Australian Research Data Commons as well, have given it a lot of support. Next slide, please, Jonathan. So, I mean, this is a real lightning overview of the session, but the key thing here is we had a huge amount of submissions. I mean, I think there were like 90 plus proposals for sessions. It was just crazy, and a really diverse range of kind of things people wanted to do. So panel discussions, interactive sessions, workshops, project meetings, lightning talks, and of course a lot of posters. One of the things we decided to do was kind of extend this to include have a kind of unconference style session on the third day. So folks who are attending in person will be able to propose a session. We'll be releasing slots through the conference. And what we want to do is enable folks who kind of come together, hear something interesting in one of these sessions, to then follow up and have a dedicated session, maybe 30 minutes or an hour, and be able to do that. Now you can see this current schedule here at the sked.com site for PIDFest. Next slide, please, Jonathan. And I just want to say the in-person attendance was limited to 170, and it sold out in hours. And again, I think this speaks to the sheer volume of demand. This is a lot of pent-up demand. It's been a few years since the last PIDapalooza, and we have been meeting at things like PID-IG for the last few years, but it's not long enough. There's not enough space to have those kind of long, rich, detailed conversations that we used to have at PIDapalooza. And I think, you know, the speed with which those in-person registrations sold out really speaks to that. So I just wanted to kind of flag to everyone in this group that there is unlimited virtual participation, and all of this kind of scheduled, the formal sessions will be available via that. So there are some which have focused on very interactive things, kind of, you know, live working on things, and some of those won't work for kind of virtual participation, but you can still register for virtual participation there at the link on the slide. So please do come along, join us virtually. If any of you are coming and have managed to be one of the lucky few who got those kind of in-person tickets, great. I'll look forward to seeing you in Prague. And yeah, thanks for the chance to share the update on this. And maybe we can report back on how it went and think about plans for the next one at the next IG. Brilliant.
Perfect. Thanks, Josh. Wonderful. Don't think, again, questions really about anything, not just about PIDFest, but about any PID-related topic are welcome. I see that we haven't really risen above the 21 participants, but don't forget this is being videoed and recorded. And so a lot of people do watch after the event. So thank you to the speakers for their contributions, because I'm sure it's going to be watched by many. So we're up at number 6. I'm going to hand over to Larry. Are you there, Larry?
I'm here.
Fantastic. So here we go, over to Larry. I don't know if Larry needs any introduction to people. Larry Lanham has worked at CNRI for, well, ever since CNRI started. And what can I say? A titan in the world of identifiers.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I'll call on a little bit of that history. This is about PIDs at scale, and I'll use DOI as an exemplar. Let's have the first slide, please. Well, the second slide. All right. So I thought I'd start with history. It seems appropriate since I'm the old guy here. In March of 2000, we had 60,000 DOI resolutions. That's the amount of traffic during that month. In March of 2024, we had 1.7 billion. So that's a many million-fold increase in traffic and responsibility. The technical staff responsible for that resolution infrastructure was 4 in 2000, and in 2024, again 4 people. So we accomplished that many million-fold increase in service level with a 0% increase in staffing. So how did we do that? That's the point of this talk, which is scaling. So I divided into three different sets of reasons. There are a number of ways to cut that. Architecture is scalability, which includes being distributed. And this is scalable in the computing sense, whereby you get to increase the level of activity, the level of service, simply by adding more computers, faster computers, better network service, et cetera. You don't actually have to change the way the system works. It will scale up over time. And the handle system, which is behind the DOI, has proven to be scalable in that way. The internet is the primary example today of something that scales in that sense, which is not perfectly surprising since the same guy, Bob Kahn, was behind both of them. Distributed, you pretty much need a distributed system to be scalable, so you don't have one big honking computer somewhere. And restricted functionality. This is to keep it simple. Stay in your lane. I sometimes say that I've spent much of the last 20 years or so keeping functionality out of the handle system. Keep it to what it does. It's a one-trick pony. You give the system an identifier, it sends you back associated information, the information that the people who minted the handle want you to see and think you need to interact with or otherwise deal with the entity that's being identified. Second aspect is externalities. This is part of the keep it simple. Don't get too wrapped up in current technology. Have a system that can adapt to new changes. And certainly there have been a lot of changes. So be able to take advantage of faster computers, faster networks, and so on. And finally, experience, Kaizen. I like that idea, constant improvement. So we'll start by looking at the architecture itself. This fairly complicated looking slide, which works better as a build, but not doing builds today, shows that the handle system is a set of handle services. DOI is a handle service. And each of those services consists of a number of service sites. Each of the service sites consists of a number of servers, and the records finally come out at the server. And the point of this chart is to show that the number of trips a client makes out to the network is independent of the number of services, service sites, servers, and handles. The example, the non-existent handle up in the upper left, resolve 10.152/59.5. If that's a valid handle, a valid DOI, the clients know, the machine clients know that there is a handle of the form 0.ma/10.152. Every prefix has a handle record is a suffix under the handle prefix 0.ma, which tells you where you resolve handles of that prefix. And that global handle registry is just more handle servers. There's no difference. It's just the client knows to start there. They are born with that knowledge. You resolve that handle to get back the service information for 10.152, which tells you where to go to resolve your 10.152/59.5. And the scalability point of this chart is that those trips, that 2 trips out the network, 1 trip if you've cached the service information, which is by default for 24 hours, remains the same. That's 2 trips out to the network when you finally get the associated information, whether there's 10 handle servers or 1 billion handle servers. You're still going out for 2 trips. And that's the important part of performance. Scalability includes performance. I mean, if it took an hour to resolve a handle, no one would use it. So that's part of the scalability issue. The network latency is one of the main obstacles to performance. Computers are awfully fast, but networks, until we get to quantum entanglement, you're always going to have speed of light issues. You can't make 100 trips out to the network and have any sort of performance. So you want to scale in this fashion. Next slide, please. Here's what that service information looks like. The artist's rendition of the service of a digital structure that contains the service information that the client can interpret. It gives you all the servers, the IP addresses, port numbers, public keys, and so on, everything the client needs. And the client can pick one of those. If you pick a service site, then you hash into the server if there's multiple servers to a server site. We used to do a lot more of that, but computers, the virtual servers we use are so good now that most service sites consist of a single computer, single server. Next slide, please. So the second aspect of scalability is to keep it simple. So most people, probably in this crowd especially, think of scholarly information as the sort of thing you use a DOI for. But the same system, the last 2 complicated slides are here embodied in that blue cloud labeled internet. The exact same process would be used in this case for a application to track the readings off of a sensor somewhere. Once you abstract away the details of what sort of information, what sort of application you're dealing with, the connection between the identifier and the information you need to utilize what the identifier identifies is the same, no matter what it is you're identifying, no matter what kind of digital entity is you're dealing with. We've kept it to have the same architecture, the same approach. This is part of the success in computer science. Think about storage mechanisms and file systems. The people who design storage systems, which have become phenomenally efficient over the years, don't care what's in your file. And the people who design file systems don't care how the storage system works. They meet at a little thin neck. That is the handing off of the file to the storage system and vice versa. The internet is the same. The internet moves packets. The network engineers don't care what's in the packets. And the application builders don't care how the packets get to them. This allows each side to be very efficient. Next slide, please. On to the externalities. So we have taken advantage of this. This is one of the ways we've been able to scale. 1.7 billion would not be possible the way we did things 20 years ago. In March of 2000, if we wanted to put up a new server, we'd spec it out from Western Digital or someplace like that. We'd get a quote, we'd put in the order, it would come in a box. Some weeks later, we'd open it up, we'd take the top off, we'd put memory in, we'd fool around with it, we'd test it, we'd put it in the back room on a raised floor, or we'd put it in the back of somebody's car and take it to a colo center, which had diesel generators and bulletproof glass. We don't do any of that anymore. We can set up a virtual server anywhere on the planet within minutes. The system, the way it's currently configured, has a minimum of 8 servers and a maximum of 48. And I can't tell you at this instant how many of those are running, because that scales up and down depending on the amount of traffic. We can, and if 48 was not, we haven't needed more than 48, but if we needed more than 48, we could make that to 96 within a matter of minutes. The other thing we've taken advantage of are the content delivery platforms, of which Cloudflare is currently the one we use. That gives us global load balancing, so that if one of those 8 or 48, somewhere in between their servers, is too busy, Cloudflare will make sure it doesn't get addressed until it calms down a little bit. Or if one of them is lurching and not doing too well, Cloudflare keeps track of that. It will do health checking and route around those issues. We had done that in the past. We had to do it with a pair of giant honking Cisco servers, very expensive. And they would do that across the network, but we had to contract with a specialist who knew how to do that. This is now a commodity activity. You don't have to be a rocket scientist anymore to get this sort of performance off the network. I think, as a slight sidebar here, I think the ability to put up a service on the internet, the ease with which that can now be accomplished is underestimated in the advances we made over the last decade or so. It's so much easier to put up a service on the network now than it used to be. Next slide now, Jonathan. All right, back to the stay in your lane. Simple core functionality means that, so DOI is an example. DOI is not tied. We didn't make DOI technically work just for journals. We made a general mechanism, general platform that worked for journals, but then DOI was able to go from journals to government reports to data to movies and TV shows. Every movie and TV show you look at has a DOI, although you don't see it. It's used in business to business. Scientific instruments, construction products, natural history specimens, which you heard about from Walter. Research projects like RAID, and even avatars of movie stars now get DOIs. And there's no particular reason for that to stop. Next slide. And this is the final slide. This is continuous improvement. We like to think continuous improvement. So we keep working at it. We didn't stop 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Robert Tuploshnek, some of you know, and I this was what we came up with. I wanted a slide's worth of what have we done recently. So we replaced a primary secondary setup with a multi-primary route. This removes a single point of failure for administration. There was never a single point of failure for resolution from the very beginning, but it used to be with a primary secondary, you had only one service which you could do administration. This has now changed. We made it easier to edit by having a overwrite when exists function as opposed to a delete and recreate function, or replace, add, modify, delete individual handle values. The handle system has its own over the network protocol, over the wire protocol, a very nice protocol, I think, but real specialist activity to use it. So we've also created a REST API using JSON and HTTP. Cloudflare, AWS stuff that I talked about. We've done some log analysis improvements, recently improved geolocation for DOI proxy requests. And that's the end there. So in some, we've scaled by having a scalable architecture, keeping it simple, taking advantage of the environment improving around us, and trying to continually improve the system. Both the DOI Foundation and CNRI are not-for-profit organizations. We haven't tried to greatly monetize this activity. We like that it works well, and we want to keep it working well. That's the end.
Great, thanks, Larry. So opportunity for questions. Just when you were saying about that, my favorite handle system application is the one from China that tracks baby milk. There was a scandal a number of years ago in China with contaminated baby milk, and one of their early deployments as a handle system, a very large handle system user in China, a consortium, was to track baby milk through the supply chain to stop that ever happening again. And it's gigantic. I mean, I don't even know how many tins of baby milk are consumed or sold in China, but you can bet it's a very large number. So I think this is important. I think scale and Wouter mentioned that too. It's something that even though at the very beginning, when you've just started your beginning application, I think thinking how to scale and how will scale is absolutely key to persistence over time. Because it's no good if your system works, but then when it is tenfold the size, 100 times the size, it suddenly falls over. That's not persistent. And so I think what Larry's said here and some of the things that CNRI have done have just been absolutely fantastic. So thanks, Larry. Any questions? Not seeing any. So let's move on. We're at 1 hour. Where are we? Halfway through. We've got another half an hour or so, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So we've got updates from other interest groups. This is something we used to do a lot more of. Rory, are you there?
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone.
Fantastic. Shall I hand over to you? I'll give you a
Yes.
slide control of the slides.
Great, thank
Here
you.
you go. Can you introduce? I should have asked you more. This is Rory, but I've done a blank on. Could you introduce yourself? I'm terribly sorry. That's very rude. But...
Okay, hi. Rory McNeil, and I'm the CEO of ResearchBase, which produces a sample management system and electronic lab notebook called RSpace, which makes a lot of use of PIDs. And that's actually a good seg into maybe the next slide, which is why did we set up this group, which is called Working with PIDs and Tools. To kind of, what kind of tools are we thinking about? Things like data repositories, data management plans, sample management systems. So not things which are more not as bespoke, and not as they're not project-based things like Disco, but they're tools which nevertheless want to incorporate PIDs and make use of PIDs. So we noticed, or I noticed anyway, because I was the one who behind starting the group, that there was a lot of discussion about PIDs among people who were doing PIDs policy and PIDs strategy. And when we started to try to think about how to incorporate PIDs into research tools like ours, there wasn't much guidance. And we realized that it wasn't all that straightforward, although it was assumed to be straightforward by many of the people setting the policy. We're not the tools that these kind of tools are not as ambitious as something like Disco, and they have fewer resources to deal with implementation of PIDs. So the focus of the group is, okay, how do you actually work with PIDs in commonly used research tools? And the three groups that have proved to be most kind of interested in this topic and that we've worked with are, not surprisingly, the developers of the tools that want to incorporate PIDs. Interestingly, also people, data curators, data stewards, people who are in charge of deploying PIDs at research institutions, who also face similar challenges and frustrations in terms of understanding how things work, and maybe also want to deploy tools which can incorporate PIDs at their institution, so have similar interest in actual workflows. And then PIDs providers have also been another interested group. Next slide, please. So some of the past, we're quite young, this group. I think we've been around for maybe 18 to 24 months. So some of the things that we've looked at in past sessions, including incorporating IGSN IDs into a sample management system. We're very focused on interoperability. So trying to make joined up use of PIDs in workflows that involve multiple research tools, e.g. a data management planning tool, to a sample management system, to a repository, when the data flows through those different systems, how do the PIDs associated with the data, how do you maintain consistency? How do you maintain a single record? Issues faced in, as I said, institutional implementation and adoption of PIDs, that's been something else we've looked at. And happily, we coordinated, I think, quite nicely with the National PID Strategies Working Group. And in fact, in Salzburg, we had a joint session, which was great. Next slide, please. So just a heads up, this is the last slide. So this plenary, the virtual plenary, we have two sessions. One is tomorrow, and the next one is the following Thursday. So welcome everyone. Hope some of you will be able to join. And the focus this time is kind of on new things that are happening, new kinds of PIDs, which I think is an important topic for all of us. The kind of new kinds of PIDs that are emerging. IGSNs are new-ish, but they're still quite new. But PID-insts are even newer, and RAID perhaps is the newest of all. And I think that they're obviously going to be important. So we're looking at examples of, in the case of PID-inst, a data repository and a sample management system that are in the process of incorporating support for PID-inst. And in the case of RAID, it's DKRZ, the German Client Computer Center, which is doing a pilot project to incorporate RAIDs. And then we've got a couple of other speakers talking about CDAR and Metasite and PIDs, and a project from the Colorado Boulder Open Science project that relates to PIDs as well. So I tried to keep it brief, but there's a quick overview of why we came into existence, some of the things we've done in the past, and what we're doing this week and next week. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That's great, nice swift overview. For the questions, I have a question about where do you see this going? Do you think this will become really ubiquitous, that we'll see integrated tools, multiple different PID systems? Is that where this is leading, or do you see very particular application areas where you think that it'll be, this will happen in depth, or that will happen in depth, or do you think it's going to be really broad, all sorts of things will come up?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think the early adopters or the early explorers of using, looking at it from a tools perspective, there aren't that many research tools that are really focused on PIDs at the moment. It's the innovators that are doing it. But well, you asked it's just a guess really, but my guess is that yes, it will become pervasive, and that in 5 years from now, it will be commonplace for any tool which is somehow playing an important role, or most tools anyway, which are playing an important role in supporting the research data lifecycle, will have to, in some way or other, incorporate PIDs. Yes, so I do see it potentially becoming quite pervasive. Great.
Okay. So stay in touch. We're always happy to showcase the group, the other PID interest groups. Okay, shall we move on to Natasha if there are any questions? Lost a couple of folks, must be getting late for some people. Okay, so thank you very much, Rory. Natasha, are you there? I have no idea what time it is for you.
I'm here, Jonathan. It's the actually very same time at the moment of 9:40 in the morning. So yeah, amazingly same for me. I'm used to the late nighters. So thank you. Okay,
well, welcome.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about the RDA National PID Strategies Interest Group, for which I'm a co-chair. So I'm presenting this little piece on behalf of my co-chairs. So next slide, Jonathan. Okay, so what is the National PID Strategies Interest Group? So the main purpose of our group is to help exchange information between people around the world who are developing national PID strategies and help us to improve the coordination and alignment between those strategies that will help us to streamline efforts between the countries through the Research Data Alliance platform. Sorry, I'm just being asked a question on by the Zoom. Anyway, I think it's after translating. Okay, so we transitioned over from a former working group, and I'll talk about some of the outputs of that working group. We are endorsed by RDA Council, and we're building and maintaining on the outputs of the former working group that's now closed. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm a co-chair. I forgot to say I'm the Director of National Coordination at the Australian Research Data Commons. My co-chairs are Chris Brown from JISC in the UK, Hannah Herringova from the National Library of Technology in the Czech Republic, John Astler from CRKN in Canada. And actually through this group, both Hannah and myself are co-chairs of the PIDFest conference, and PIDFest came about largely through our connection via RDA, our mutual interest in the national PID strategies of both Australia and the Czech Republic, and the need to be able to get together and talk about that. So as a result, it's got the PID community together, but the actual genesis was around progressing the national PID strategies. So next slide, please. Okay, so before we had the interest group, we had a working group, and the working group ran for about 18 months as per RDA usual time frame for a working group, and it produced outputs, and the outputs were a guide and checklist to facilitate uptake and alignment of national PID strategies, which are on the rise. So we were originally tasked in the working group with just coming up with a blueprint for how to add flour, water, and sugar and create a national PID strategy. But actually, as anyone who's tried to do that would know, that's actually a very hard thing to do, and no one's actually done it like that. So there's no sort of one fits all approach. So what we came up with was a guide that compares the case studies. You can see there's 9 there that we collected, 9 case studies from different countries around the world, looking at the common elements between them, and then creating a checklist that would help people to either develop the PID strategy nationally that they're already in the middle of doing, or get one started from scratch. So the next slide, please. So just to summarize, from where we sit, we can see that national PID strategies are on the rise. We can see more and more of these proliferating around the world. There's no single cookie cutter approach to developing a national PID strategy. You can't just follow a recipe and have it done. But here are some of the critical components. So you need a clear value proposition with some use cases. You need a group or organization that's responsible for driving the strategy development. And you've seen some of these elements in the talk that Todd and John gave earlier for the US National PID strategy. So you need that open, inclusive, iterative process that really engages the stakeholders, and an accompanying roadmap that outlines practical steps for implementation is another common feature of these PID strategies. And it's very important to have engagement with the national PID, with the international PID providers, obviously. Next slide. Thank you. So our outputs are available on the RDA Zenodo community and on the National PID Strategies Working Group website, and I think they're also available on the Interest Group website now as well. And you can use these. So next slide, please. So just a shout out to the RDA Tiger program. So RDA Tiger worked with us to produce a white paper that summarizes the outputs of our working group, and they also did nice things to our checklist. So if you go to the next screen, you'll get an idea of, next slide, sorry, thanks Jonathan. You'll see, here's a look at what they did. So they have white paper there and the checklist that you could use. They've done sort of nice graphics around it. And then the next slide, Jonathan, will give a bit more of an up close view. So you can see, you know, have you established a value proposition? Have you done a stakeholder analysis? Have you collected use cases? And you don't need to follow these in order. You just pick the ones that are relevant for you, because again, it's a guide. It's not an out of the box way of doing this. And next slide, please. Yep. So so now that the working group has concluded, we've moved into the interest group, and here are some of the goals of the interest group. So it's around facilitating that information exchange through our meetings and through collecting more case studies as well. And one thing we found in the working group is that the case studies we collected at the start of the 18 months needed updating towards the end of the 18 months because they just weren't the same. These things are moving quite quickly in some cases, or much more slower in other cases, but definitely updates are needed, and it's not the case that it's set in stone. Things are changing as these national PID strategies develop as well. So we want more engagement with the PID providers as well, and I'll give an example of how we're doing that in a minute. So next slide, please. We've also got this idea that we really need to help some of the national PID strategies to better define their value proposition, and I'm hoping that that will be one of the topics that we take up at PIDFest in that 3.5 hour PID strategies block, or maybe through the unconference if people want to, component of PIDFest if people want to look at this in more detail. Next slide. Yep. So as I mentioned, we would like more case studies. One of the comments we got when we put out the documents on while they were waiting for RDA Council endorsement was, why do you have those case studies? What about other case studies? And really, we just got the ones that were submitted. So if you want more reflected, people need to submit more of these case studies to be reflected. And of course, we'll maintain that information. So next slide, please. I realise we're coming up to time. So we have 2 sessions here at this plenary. We've already had one, and we had speakers from DataCite and AUKUS. So the overall topic of our sessions this time is equity challenges for national PID strategies. And that's looking partly at the Global South and the challenges in enabling PIDs to be accessed in the Global South, but it's also about equity in all national PID strategies. So for example, in Australia, you know, we have how can we better work with Indigenous communities around PIDs and Indigenous data. You know, in Canada, they have challenges around language, for example. So it's sort of across the board issue for people. And the next slide just shows you the next, the second session. Jonathan, next slide, please. The second session there. So we'll have a variety of speakers from DataCite, Chile, India, Africa, Brazil. So please come to that session if you'd like to. It's on the 22nd. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the last one. So just a reminder that we have the National PID Strategies session block coming up if you'd like to join. And thanks for inviting me to speak.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. That was wonderful. Okay, I'm going to move forward to the end. We're coming towards the end. Questions, comments, and discussions. I was thinking, actually, as we're reflecting over all of the presentations, and all the things that jump out to me are things like engagement, words like connecting, collaboration, and actually, I was thinking, how do I sum up this session? And I don't have to, because John did it for me. If you look in the chat, he says not enough emphasis is put on community approaches to preservation and the power of community governance. So involving everyone I think it's key. And I also think it's key to persistence, because the more we know about how things work, the more we share, the more it's transparent, the more knowledge there is, and the better chances that things will persist. And I think he's totally right. We always think of it certainly in the foundation as half of it might be technology, but at least half of it is social infrastructure, and how we work together and what we talk about. So I would like just to thank, I'll open this up to any comments, if there are any. And if you do have comments or questions following this, then don't hesitate to, Larry.
I'll just, in terms of technology and social organization, I like to think that the purpose of this technology is to get out of the way of the social organization. It shouldn't determine that. In another area, I was just telling someone that the technology should be organized around who does what, and it shouldn't be the other way around. The technology shouldn't determine who does stuff. Who does stuff should determine the technology.
Thanks, Larry. So I just had Leslie reminded me about the slides. I'll send a note out to all our speakers just to double check you're okay with me posting the slides, because what I'll do then is put them into a Google Doc and link to it from the collaborative notes. But I'll send you a private note about that just to double check. I don't want to do with it without your permission. Any other comments, questions?
You have our permission.
Oh, great.
Jonathan,
Yeah,
you have my permission. Feel free.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So we'll do it all again next week with mostly the same people, so that'll be fun. Meanwhile, share the recording, please, of course, as widely as. Oh, hang on, there is a question. Is RDA working on the data repository piece, legacy IDs? Wow, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Does anyone have an answer to that? Not that I'm aware of, but that doesn't mean much. Is there some background to that, Kim?
Hi, yeah, I'm with NCBI and at the NIH, and we have a large number of data repositories with legacy ID systems. And so I quiver at the thought of having to get or provide or mint through DataCite DOIs for our submission systems, or having duplicative IDs and a user community that then doesn't know what they should be citing in their applications. And so I think it's a big, I think it's actually a fairly big topic because there are quite a number of data repositories internationally that have, in some cases for decades, been issuing IDs that we now know, don't meet the definition of a PID, but are IDs that are widely and heavily used in those communities for certain types of data.
I mean, the case study that. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh, just that I know Kim is partially responding to a portion of the U.S. National PID strategy that Todd and I were talking about. There is a section within that document that discusses the legacy PID systems and the need for transition. And so I think that this is something that a lot of us discuss behind closed doors, but not out in the open, which is that there are systems that don't meet all of the desirable characteristics of what we're all moving towards, but are heavily used and are important. And that there needs to be a path for systems and communities to move towards better practice. Todd brought this up in the discussion in the outline, and I think that that's of the document that we put forward, and I think that it's something that I don't know of a discrete RDA working group that is working on this, but I do know that it is core to the continued work of Todd and my co-chairing of that national PID strategy. So it's something that maybe we can reach out and discuss together, Kim.
Yeah,
and
it's a topic that I'm interested in for obvious reasons, and I don't want to you know, I don't want to, you know, sit in my little repository world corner and just say,
Yeah.
okay, this is what I'm going to do. You know,
Sure.
because the global conversation, the national conversation in the US is about coming up with, you know, reusable solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and building on that, Kim, it's also one of the reasons that we wanted to de-emphasize the use of like a chart with use this for this, because there are people who have been using ARCs, for example, and you know, it's a perfectly functional system. It suits a lot of user needs, but it doesn't have the kind of interoperability and the resolvability and the characteristics of a PID in the way that I think that we want the community to head in support of open science. And how do we get there? Not sure. But leaving ARCs or like, and it doesn't have to, there is a long list of identifiers that could be on that. That if we said, you know, you shouldn't use this, but you should use this, then it's going to be a barrier to conversations and advancing solutions. And it is really going to anger people who are like, I'm really committed to this system and I've been using these for decades.
Yeah.
And we're trying to avoid that, but help push the community forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So yeah,
Follow up.
sorry, we've only got a couple of minutes left. But that could be an interesting topic for us to pick up for a future plenary. I'll see if there's interest, because I know there are case studies out there of legacy systems that have migrated to wherever, or have plugged in resolver systems on top of their own one, for instance. But okay, I'll note that down, and that's if there's interest, we can certainly run a session on that. Okay, we've got 1 minute to go, so just leaves me saying thank you so much to all of you, and see you all again in a week's time, and if not in Prague, virtually or in person. So thanks again. Thanks to my co-chairs, Josh and Nabucco.
Thanks,
And,
Jonathan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
No
Thank
idea
you.
what time of day it is,
Bye.
but there you go. Bye.
Right.